Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome, benvenido, karibu. Welcome in every language that we speak. We are so glad to have you here today. Thank you for joining us. This courageous conversation is facilitated by the Girl Child Long Walk to Freedom project. And we do this because our focus is on gender equality. And we try to make sure that we address issues at the intersection of faith, gender equality or inequality, and community development. Today, I want to not only thank you for joining us, but I want to thank our panelists who are here today. And this is going to be a conversation that it's been a long time coming. This is about language. This is about access. This is about, global equality. As far as this conversation is concerned, we are going to take questions at the end. If you have questions and comments, feel free to drop them at the chat, in the chat. We'll answer them afterwards. And please keep your microphone on mute. And if you want to learn more about our courageous conversation or the Girl Child Long Walk project, please join our hub or let us know, and we'll be happy to send you some information and catch up with you afterwards. Right now, we are going to start with just a moment of reflection. We're going to ask Emily Nielsen-Johns to sort of lead us through that. And afterwards, we'll see a video, which is a compilation of the various videos that we have done. Our girl child speaks many languages. And then we'll dive into the conversation. So back to you, Emily, please.
Let me add my warm welcome to Marie Rose's, and I see many are just joining. So welcome. So we are so excited to unveil this new video clip that we've been working hard on, and it really embodies the essence of our conversation today. But before we dive in, I invite you into a moment of silence. We all have busy days. We've been coming and going. We have a lot on our mind. And every time we breathe in, we center into our own source, our own being. And wherever we are on the globe, we are together in this moment of silence. So let me start with a quote we often use. Another world is on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. Just breathe at the center of your being for a few mindful moments and feel the solace of being at home where all is well within your being. Amen. And now we invite you to bring that inner knowing into this video as we watch together and enjoy.
Girl child.
Niña.
Petite fille.
Keyarinya.
Tami bedu pietene sura.
Toto akike.
Menina criança.
Omwana w'obuwala.
Latera nyaga.
Omwana w'omwishiki.
Can you remember who you were before the world told you who you should be.
Deep down, I've always believed in myself and known I'm just as good as anyone else. But lately, I notice that the world treats me differently because I'm a girl.
En el fondo, siempre he creído en mí misma y sé que soy tan buena como cualquier otra persona. Pero últimamente me doy cuenta que el mundo me trata de manera diferente porque soy una niña.
What's going on here?
Girl child, you are right to question.
Who? Do I know you?
I am your mother's mother and her mother's mother. I am the mother of all.
Qu'est-ce qui se passe?
Petite fille, tu as raison de te poser des questions.
Qui est-ce? Est-ce que je vous connais?
Je suis la mère de ta mère et la mère de sa mère. Je suis la mère de tout le monde.
Patriarchy was woven into our civilizations, our laws, economies, philosophies, sciences, and especially our religions. It is everywhere, and it is invisible.
Sarautar maza ta shigo cikin halin wayewarmu, dokokinmu, tattalin arzikinmu, ilimin dabi'unmu, kimiyyarmu, musamman addininmu. Abin yana ko'ina, kuma ba a iya ganinsa.
Women and men, girls and boys, even the earth itself, are suffering under the domination of patriarchy.
မိန်းမယောက်ျားမင်းကလေးယောက်ျားလေးကဘာမြေကြီးကိုယ်တိုင်ကိုကတီဖိုအားကြီးဝါဒအုပ်ဆိုးတဲ့စနစ်အောက်မှာနာကျင်ခံစားနေရတယ်
We must keep walking the Exodus path from slavery to the freedom of the Promised Land. Imagine if we could re-know the beautiful world that was meant for all God's children.
A world where girls can grow up feeling safe and equally valued?
Ni lazima tuendelee kutembea kutoka kwenye njia ya utumwa na kuelekea kwenye uhuru wa nchi ya ahadi. Hebu fikiri kama tungejenga upya dunia nzuri ya kupendeza kwa ajili yetu sote watoto.
Dunia ambayo wasichana wanaweza kukua salama na kuthaminiwa pia.
Girl child, your curiosity has set you on a path many others have walked before you. Because of their work, we know the way forward, but there's a lot more to do and more truth to discover. Are you ready to take this journey with me?
Menina criança, sua curiosidade a colocou em um caminho que muitas outras já trilharam antes de você. Por causa do trabalho delas, sabemos o caminho a seguir. Mas há muito mais a fazer e mais verdades a descobrir. Você está pronta para fazer essa jornada comigo?
You're on mute. Oh.
Yes, I am. I was on mute. Thank you very much. I think this is wonderful. This is the first time that we're showing this video, which we want to thank our colleague Lígia for. And we want to thank each and every one of you because of the panelists who actually have been very involved in the translations of the different videos. So what are we talking about today? We are talking about beyond English, the need for translation in social change. It is a major barrier. And as we know, languages and people speaking different languages, I mean, there are linguistic barriers. On the other hand, it is an issue when language is used as a barrier. Right now, what we have the fact that, 50% of information that is put on the internet is actually in English. It is an issue in terms of people's ability to access information, to access services, but that's only part of it. And English is not just about English. And since we're having a courageous conversations, when we were doing the planning meeting, or the panelists said, it's a courageous conversation, we have to name it. We're talking about dominant, languages. Oops, I'm having issues. Not sure why. We're talking about dominant languages. We're talking about colonial languages, old colonialism, neo-colonialism, and the fact that very often these languages are official languages in so many global South countries, and official languages that are not necessarily sort of reaching rural communities, reaching low-income communities, and for most, very often, given that women and girls very often do not have access to education, we're talking about communities, not only low-income communities being left behind, but also gender equality issues, as women and girls are definitely not being able to access services that they need. So this is a very critical issue, and we can raise the issue. We can also, we're going to talk about, what is it that we can do? And it is not as simple as easy as translation. So at this stage of the game, first of all, I would like to quickly introduce our panelists. We have a wonderful group of women. Lígia Conti, who's the project leader of the Girl Child Reading Journey for Portuguese-speaking countries. We have Pamela Shao, who's the CEO for Financial Sectors Deepening Tanzania, and as she stresses, focuses on women's economic development and access to financial services. We have Sabine Nkusi, who's the Gender and Protection Unit Lead at the Tier Fund. These are all community leaders that work in Africa, Latin America, and globally. We're excited to have them here, very much we want to welcome them. We're going to start with, Sabine. Sabine, first of all, thank you so much for the work that you have done, with your team in terms of helping us to translate videos. And as your team, we're asking for translations, videos in French, in Burmese, and in Hausa. You're working with very diverse communities in Africa. And you are yourself, you're from Uganda. Can you please tell us in terms of why does translation matter? Or do you see language and linguistic barriers being a block for social change? Please tell us more.
Thank you very much. Can you all hear me? Good. Well, thank you so much, Marie-Rose, Emily, and Leah, for just the opportunity to be part of this courageous conversation. And I think it is indeed courageous because there is so much that we can pack around language. So I'll start by saying hello, by saying also bonjour à tous et à toutes, by also saying muraho mnirwe amakuru yanyu. And I come to you, I guess, from a place of privilege, where I kind of position myself as an African woman who speaks many languages, but who also has the, I guess, who has a Western education. Amakuru ni meza. Yes, I see someone responding in my mother tongue. That's wonderful. Yes, so as I was saying, I have the privilege of a Western education, but I also speak multiple language, and the fact that I'm able to speak what is known as, I guess, the recognized languages, or is a privilege in itself, and that means that it can open doors for me, and on multiple levels. I can have access to things that I guess people from my country cannot have access to, simply because I'm able to speak the recognized language, the official languages. So I just wanted to kind of put it out there and just say, this is the context where I'm coming from, and also recognizing that there is a privilege in that, and it's not everyone who has that privilege. So I think language is a wonderful thing, right? It is a wonderful thing because it allows us to communicate with others. It allows us to share our experiences. It allows us to share the knowledge and even expertise that we have. But when not all of us can understand English or French or other colonial languages, then it leads to exclusion. And I have seen this in my work and the places where I work. And exclusion can really, I guess, present itself in multiple ways. So I would say that, firstly, when we see, that communities and groups, and even thinking about my work, the work that I do, women's group and marginalized people, when they don't have access to the rich body of work that is available out there, because it is either in English or in French, it is really, it's very, very sad. And also bear in mind that actually, often at times, this body of work or knowledge is written about them, right? So this information is written about them, but it is not translated so that they can have access to it. So that's the first round. So communities where we work, groups do not have access to this rich body of work. And the other way I see language also being seen as, or being used as exclusion, is when knowledge and material is produced in local languages by indigenous people, but because these people do not speak English or do not speak French, their knowledge is not taken seriously, yeah, because it is not the acceptable or the recognized language used, which means that other people miss out as well. I think back to, when I was growing up and, going to visit my, in the village, my grandparents, and sitting down with the women in my mother's community, and the sort of information that they were sharing. And it was in Kinyarwanda, but I keep saying there is such richness to all of these, but no one has access to it. Why? Because it is not translated. Yeah. So we're missing out. Some of us are missing out, but also others are missing out. And I think the other way that language can also be seen as used as a way of excluding people, I think is around I guess, access to, let's say, meetings and conferences. I mean, how many of us have been to conferences where when English is the only language? And that is a form of exclusion, because you are actually restricting participation, and the language that is used there will inform who can actually attend. And that is something that I have personally been thinking about. As Tia Fund, we've been thinking about globally, but specifically in the work that I do, that I lead, when we convene, let's say, like global meetings or training, we have to recognize that this organization works in different continents, in different countries. So we need to recognize that our colleagues in Latin America or Francophone Africa have immense contribution to make to what is happening. So therefore, we have to be intentional. And the key thing for me has been to be intentional, especially in our budget, in my budget, when I'm budgeting, to have like a translation interpreting line so that people can have access to, to some of these meetings. The other way I also see language being, I guess, a way of excluding people is how we complicate language, right? Sometimes the materials that we can use, and this is not necessarily because of translation, but language in general, the material that is produced can be so complicated when in fact, where this material is going to be used, people will not necessarily understand it. So for me, I think, unless you're speaking to a room of academics, use language that is relevant, language that is simple, that is accessible to people, because otherwise what you're producing will not be, it will be a waste. And I think probably like the last thing that I would want to probably talk about is contextualize. It is important that we contextualize, and when we translate materials, that we make it culturally appropriate. Not only if it's not culturally appropriate, we are excluding people because things do not make sense to them. But we are also wasting resources, right? Because if this is not going to be used, then what's the point of producing this? So we're wasting resources. So I think it is important that we contextualize material that we're translating, and that just even reflecting back to when we're going through this whole exercise of translating the Hausa, the Girl Child Journey to Freedom video into Hausa, so from English to Hausa, there were many words that were in English that did not make sense in Hausa. So then, and I think even if you look at the video itself is the Hausa is probably longer than the English version, because sometimes that one word in English requires 2-3 words in Hausa to make it make sense. So I think there is the importance for us to really contextualize our translation. And also, if I reflect back to, about some of the work that we do around transferring masculinities, again, contextualization is very, very important. TFN has an approach called transforming masculinities. And in English, it's very clear, but if you translate it either in French or other languages, the meaning is different, right? So we had to think about translation so that, first of all, people understand what it means, and also it is also validated by people. So for me, I would say translation is very, very important. It has to be culturally appropriate. We need to make the language very, very simple. And also, let's think about the loss that we're facing if these materials are not translated, either, for us who do this work, but also for the communities as well. And I'll stop there.
Sabine, there are so many layers that you have stressed and highlighted. And, and sometimes I think what I want to stress, and you've done it very eloquently, is that sometimes it's a question of life and death. And it's also a question of dignity. In humanitarian contexts, crisis and disasters, you have people that go, and I know in Haiti after the 2010 earthquake, and I've talked to colleagues, in Southeast Asia or Turkey, well, not the recent earthquake, but who basically say when it comes to meetings, they were done in English and no translation was offered. This is where what you have language used as a barrier, and when language used as a tool for exclusion. And then at this point, you have a system that really systematically marginalize the very people that they are supposed to help. And you've talked about the question of budget. I know I've worked sort of like I remember in, and large organizations have the budget. But I think it's also a point where people have to be sensitive to the fact that when you have a small organization and they're trying to make sure that they have translated documents, it's an additional cost, especially if it needs to be thoughtful and it needs to be supported. So that's also a consideration, as opposed to, people sort of like thinking, and the fact that in terms of language, what we're talking about, it is not just about translating words for words. Culturally speaking, this is a huge point because people don't necessarily understand that. Culturally speaking, if you don't have something that's culturally appropriate and thoughtful, you're wasting resources and basically you're not helping people. So thank you very much for unpacking all of that. And now, Pamela, I know you're working with women, and I remember during our planning session, you talked about, here it is, You know, you have 3 master's degrees. I mean, the gender equality, the official language piece and everything else, then like in your country, you can't like buy property. So there's like that piece and the fact that a lot of information, okay, I should let you talk, but I love what you had to say. So, I mean, I did. So Pamela, you know, please tell us about some of the financial, legal implications, marginalization of that some of this creates.
Thank you very much, Marie-Rose. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you, and the team and the distinguished panelists. I'm very grateful to be here. Good evening, bonjour, buonasera, habari za jioni. So, I do speak 4 languages. So again, like my fellow panelists had said, it's a privilege. But I'm very happy. I went to Google today and found out that 80 million people in the world speak Kiswahili. So that is something that is amazing and we're quite proud of. But despite all of that, we do see a lot of challenges. And when you look back, really, Marie-Rose, is that exclusion for the girl child begins the day she's born, I would say. There are so many barriers that are placed. I'm sure there are some cultures that there are even certain foods you're not allowed to give to a girl child. These foods are only for the male child because this is the leader, this is going to be somebody important, while the woman, the girl child, is going to be maybe someone's wife and produce several children. So you find that inequality starting early on. And then again, it continues when you look at access to social services. And I'm going to look at education. So in schools, that is where the socialization and growth takes place. So girls are mostly excluded. Countries like ours have gone ahead and really promoted what you call it universal primary education. So at least girls can go all the way, or they have at least 7 years of primary education. But where it starts to make sense is secondary education, and you find most girls are excluded. And it is during secondary education when the colonial languages are now being introduced. So English becomes the medium of instruction. And then that's where everything starts going wrong. So when you look at the financial sector, women have the burden of taking care of families, but they are the highest number. They present the highest percentage of financially excluded. So if a woman is financially excluded, she is uneducated, cannot understand the terms and conditions. You can imagine the kind of life that she will be living. When you go to most of the financial institutions, the terms and conditions are in English. More or less, she will be told, just sign here, 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 not knowing what exactly she's putting herself into. When we look at, and this is something that we're really addressing, when it comes to training for business, training for elementary, how to do your books. You go to, you want to introduce a little bit of digitization, you open an Excel spreadsheet, it's in English. The instructions are in English. So trying to translate that in a manner where a woman already has been excluded, I can say from birth, or excluded from the formal education systems, it becomes quite a challenge. We are now moving into the digital financial space. Everything is on mobile phones. Women don't own mobile phones. Most times the phone has been registered in the name of the husband, and it is the property of the husband. A woman needs to go and get a loan, and the collateral is land. You don't own land. Like I was making fun. Yeah, I have 3 masters. Cannot take a loan without permission from my husband because, yeah, the title deed and everything else. So it becomes quite challenging when you see the barriers that are in front of women who are the majority and actually are the engine of economic development. Now, we always try, look back and say, what if the situation was not like this? What if the system encouraged women and supported women? Where would we be? Where would our country be? Because despite all these barriers, they are still doing business. They are still raising children. They are still in their little co-ops, lending, borrowing, ensuring that their children get a decent education. They are really trying to make sure their girls don't live the life they are living with the little education that they have. Again, with the barrier of language and translation can be quite tricky. Now, my country has more than 250 tribes. So other than Kiswahili, we also have our tribal languages. So there are places where even Kiswahili itself is not as universal as we would like. There's also trying to translate technology from English into Kiswahili, and then finding its way into Masa, into Chaga, into Kinyakyusa. It becomes, again, there is so much that is lost in translation. So this lack of access of social services, especially education, where women are excluded, especially at secondary level. And at secondary level, that is, like I said, that is where now the formal education begins, and instruction is in English. So there you find less and less girls. And as you go higher, it becomes, again, that pyramid that doesn't seem to go away. And as a result, in terms of what exactly we should do, I think the financial sector in Tanzania and in the world is becoming very gender focused. Whether we are doing it right, it's still in the wind to be decided. But there are many ways of trying to make sure. I was in a conversation where we were. I think the presenter was okay. Even the mobile phones are not gender sensitive. They are very big. They don't fit in a woman's hands. So everybody is trying in their level best to see how to accommodate women. So, but again, with all of this, I'm sorry to say, it tends to be a bit superficial if you don't address the underlying issue. When the access, when it is very important for the girl to have access to education there, where she can learn these international languages and be part of the international ecosystem. Marie Rosa can talk all day, so maybe.
And I could listen to you all day. I think we could listen to you all day and to each and every one of you. So I think that it is clear that it is not an easy and simple issue. And one of the things that I want to stress, because this is not about sort of like bashing sort of like colonial powers and domination and whatever, it's the fact that in some instances, these official languages, such as English, are unifying. I mean, I am part of Global South networks where basically as people are coming from different places in the world, India, Latin America, whatever, the US, English is the common language. So, I mean, there is that too, but it's a question of intention. It's a question of making sure that we're sensitive to some of these nuances, because otherwise we're not doing what we're supposed to do. So thank you very much for stressing all of the and all of the nuances that need to be addressed. Lígia, you are working in education in Brazil, and I also realized that, you know, it's sort of like a different context. You're working with universities, you are yourself an English teacher, you've worked on translation. So can you tell us more about some of what you see as far as the issues with translation, access, and language, and everything else, what you're learning, what you know?
I think Lígia may have accidentally dropped off really quick.
Oh, did she have issues? She said something about it.
Issues. Yeah, I'll let you know as soon as she's back in.
Okay, so what I will say in the interest of time, because Lígia and I have had some interesting conversations, is that, and I'll try to say the basics so that she can say her piece, if hopefully she can come in, is that part of the issues, and Brazil has a huge population, over 200 million, is that a lot of information is not available in Portuguese, which is the dominant language in Brazil. So that becomes an issue in terms of accessing books and information, even sort of like at the university levels. Then the other piece of it is also in terms of, obviously there's a gender issue in terms of ability for girls to access education, and an income issue in terms of lower income. And there's also a question in terms of indigenous populations. For example, one of the things that is clear is that the government doesn't want education to be provided in indigenous languages. And indigenous languages right now are not written. So there is a certain level of bias and exclusion when it comes to that. So as I'm looking at time, and one of the things that I want to say, because Pamela, you have started talking about some of the things that can be done. I know we've talked about exclusion, and we've started unpacking, and there are layers and layers, issues in terms of that are associated with languages, equity, gender, and all of this, you know, official languages versus dominant colonial languages and everything else. Sabine, in your context, as you're working with sort of like global teams and partners and everything else, what do you feel sort of like in a pragmatic way? Because people will very often sometimes say, oh, they don't necessarily have the budget. They don't have the money for that. I know that sometimes, like, for example, they're refugee and they're being serviced by One Truth Solution, like a group working on getting information from, you know, communities that are being served, that will say, we want to have conversations. And people will say, oh, we don't have translators. So what can be done? What do you think?
Yeah, so I think, you know, from the experience that we've had in Tier Fund, and I guess even from our own experience, I think if we're to make you know, language accessible, or if we're to make it more inclusive, I guess that there are various things that we can do. I think the first one is really if you have a material that you are translating, you need to validate it, right? You need to validate it. It has to be validated by the expert. And when I say experts, I'm not talking about linguists, you know, I'm not talking about those people, but I'm talking about the people who are going to be using this material, yeah? So does it make sense for them? Is that relevant? Is that culturally relevant? So they need to validate it. So I think that's the thing that has been my learning over the years when we do translation or even when we do an adaptation of whatever, we sit with the community and they say whether this is going to work for them or not. So validation, I think, is very important from the experts. And when I say experts, I'm not talking about, the language experts. I'm talking about the people who are going to be using this material, because it is about them and they know what's best for them. So validate that. And the other thing that I also want to say is that, and I guess this speaks to, this area of power dynamics, etc. I think there has to be a level of, I suppose, humility from some of us, right? So we need to recognize the sovereignty of people over their own languages, because they are the expert in their own languages. So let's be humble. Yeah, let's just say it like it is. Let's be humble and recognize that actually people, Pamela has spoken about the multiple languages that are spoken, in Tanzania. And I remember also speaking with a colleague in Nigeria when we were talking about, the Hausa translation of the video. And she was saying there's a Hausa, but they're also, depending on areas, there'll be different sort of Hausa as well, so it's not just one, it's multiple forms of languages and dialects, right? And all of that brings such richness to what a community is. So I would say we need to recognize and be humble and recognize the sovereignty of the people. So you were talking about budgets. I think, yes, I recognize that people don't have budgets, but I think it's also priorities. I'm going to say this, it's about priorities, because I think you need to be intentional. It's about being intentional. It's about what it is that you're prioritizing. Yeah. If you prioritize access, you will think about budget. Yes, small organizations might not have that, but I think it's about being intentional and prioritizing what is required. And maybe my last bit as well, I think we need, as I said earlier, sometimes you look at, I've been to places to, I've worked in communities and, with the work that I've been doing and, with my colleagues, and then we look at some of the materials that we have, not necessarily produced by us as an organization, but other organizations, you're thinking, even myself, I don't necessarily understand, because it's so academic, and it's not really what is needed here. So let's make language clear, simple, and accessible. I think those are some of the ways. Yeah.
I think that this completely makes sense. Thank you very much, Sabine. I see, and these are things that have actually generated conversations. And I was gonna say that Lígia is back, but I guess we lost her again. Ooh, okay. Now, before we actually try to open and see if there are questions, but Sabine, very quickly, I was going to say that these are things that have generated conversations, and I think this is again where having and people talk about diversity and inclusion, and it's become such a trite terms, and they talk a good talk, but they do not realize the importance of all of that, of having, in order to have things that are accessible, that make sense, that recognize the need for sovereignty and dignity, and frankly, and effectiveness. And they don't realize that some of what they do is completely pointless, if they don't address these issues. So, Pamela, you've started talking about some of the things that can be done. Are there other suggestions before we sort of stop and see if there are comments and questions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll just like to, first of all, start by appreciating what Sabine said about the sovereignty, that word only, the sovereignty of people's languages. I think that's a very good place to start. In terms of, one is that it is slowly being recognized, but I think it is still an elephant in the room in terms of it's not being given the attention it deserves. Again, there is the whole financial aspect of it, because imagine looking at the digital finance ecosystem, all the investments that have been done in creating a digital financial system that has to be universal and global, and then taking that and trying to translate. So we acknowledge the fact that it is complex, but there are steps that can be taken in terms of how do you adopt that. So again, it's useless if you're going to do so much advancement in technologies and then leave half of the world behind. So there are definitely steps that need to be taken. But again, there's also, I think, the moral recognition that all languages are equal in terms of, okay, these are colonial languages, these are local languages. I hate the word local. What do you mean local? Local as opposed to what? So local languages, indigenous languages, and then international languages and Western languages. So I think if we could come to the table and really agree, I speak Hausa, you speak French, you speak Italian, you speak Portuguese. We are people, and I think we are yet to get there. And unfortunately, the more international languages you speak, the more important you are. So we laugh at politicians who can't speak English. So they come, but they can communicate. They sit with their people, they communicate their agenda in their local languages, and people understand. But when they come to parliament, the whole country looks at it and starts laughing. Oh my God, so-and-so doesn't speak English. So when you look at the mindset that we have, and we can blame it on the colonialists, so we can blame it on whoever, but that whole mindset propaganda induction that local communities or indigenous communities have gone through, to the point where they think that their languages are not enough. So that is also driving that as well, because everyone is trying to make sure that their child speaks English. And slowly, Mary Rose, and I know Sabine, you agree with me, there are some of our languages that are dying because children are not being taught, parents are not speaking, because we want to catch up with the global north. And we really feel very proud when our children speak English and don't speak our native languages. So that whole global mindset also needs to take place. I know it's very complex, and I think if we keep at what we are doing, really emphasize on, and I think when you look at financial services or what we are trying to drive, we want to drive financial services that are affordable, wide-ranging, and useful. So if a service is not useful, if a service is not understood, then of course automatically it's not useful. So the financial sector, financial service providers are asked to translate their product into Kiswahili, translate their product to fit the context that it is going to be serviced. But again, the explaining of it is done in Kiswahili. But when you come now and go into the office or meet the bank, then you meet this form that is all in English, and it's their terms and conditions, and you're asked to sign. So those contradictions and the whole mindset or worldview that we are in, where we think our languages are not enough, really needs to be addressed. It's going to be a journey, but definitely if we keep at it, especially us who have been charged with some of these positions where you are really requested to be able to see the big picture. If we keep at it, we drive this agenda, I think in time things are going to change.
Well, thank you. And I think this is, again, it speaks to being able to perspective. It speaks to the fact that very often in terms of global South leadership, we tend to internalize the issues, the biases that we face. And we tend to sort of discount ourselves as we're faced with societies that discount us. So it's important that we speak up. It's important that we have these conversations. It's important that we bring up these issues. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for stressing, unpacking, spelling out all of this. And we will do our best to sort of spread the message and share the video and continue to advocate when it comes to all of this. So are there any, and I want to say that Lígia, our fellow panelist, is sort of absolutely so sorry because her power has been in and out. Aren't we familiar with that, ladies? So oh, my sorry. I mean, I will feel like I'm in Haiti, but yes. So it is really too bad because it's, again, talking about context. Here it is, a country like Brazil, just the power of the population, and things are not being translated in Portuguese and people are not insisting to have it translated in Portuguese. I'm just like, what the heck? You know, this is a huge market. You just need to push. Somebody needs to push. At any rate, are there any comments and questions at this stage? Oops. Jackie, please feel free. Jackie, you're muted.
Thank you so much, Sabine and Pamela and Mary Rose, for such amazing insights on language translation and just how it's impacting our lives every day in our work. I run a small nonprofit organization that is empowering, providing holistic support to widowed women in Western Kenya. And I would say 90%, 95% of the women in our organization are not literate in English. They are very literate in their own local language, and they have so much incredible wisdom to share with the rest of the world. But we've had challenges also just with the process of translation. Of course, our work is very much embedded on capacity exchange. We create learning materials, and we learn from the widows. They learn from what we may have to offer them, and so we translate all of our training tools to the local language. Right now, we are only serving widows in one area in Kenya, and they speak Luo. So even Swahili would not be ideal, even though Swahili is a national language. But as Pamela was indicating, if we are to bring tools in Swahili, that would still be a barrier to them. And one of the things we've also faced, so the comments you've mentioned about budget and how that is affecting our capacity to translate all the tools we want and translate them at the best quality possible. We faced those challenges. But one other thing we saw, because we try to communicate our work too with the global community that is also caring for the widows and supporting the work. And we had some videos done, and the women can articulate themselves in their language. So we had the videos in English, and then we got pushback from some friends on social media, sort of saying, well, we need this in English so we can understand, like we want to engage. And so I guess my comment is just that everything you've said is relevant, and I'm just wondering, like across the different levels, there is a part of you're working with the local community and you want to communicate effectively with them, but you also have this other larger community outside of the local community that you also want to continue communicating with as effectively as possible, and just managing these dynamics. Because sometimes, and I think that it's like, I think the comment around just Pamela, you talked about these being a moral imperative, because I realize sometimes because of budgetary issues, we may, kind of shift to easy solutions, like saying, let's have the widows who can speak English share something about this program. And that also begins to exclude, the voices of other women in the work. So I just wanted to appreciate this conversation. I think for me, it's highlighting how we need to continue being intentional about translation and how we make sure that we are not silencing voices that are not speaking the official and the dominant languages. So thank you so much.
Wow, thank you, Jackie. I think you're raising a lot of very important points. And one of them is sort of like the difficult dynamics and the pressure that are on groups that are, trying to work with communities. I know I faced it when, and we're starting the Haiti Community Foundation, and it's like, well, we've got Creole, we've got French, and we've got to do these reports, most of the time in English, and it's like time, and we don't have time, and we're not sleeping. So, and then I remember there was a colleague in a global gathering in London, and he said, well, I shouldn't be the one here because I'm not the one who has the most experience and the most leadership when it comes to this. I'm here because I speak English. So again, this is where it just gets difficult. And sometimes it's exhausting, and you just go and it's like, okay, what can I do? Because there's only so much I can do with the money that I have. So try making sure that all of these nuances are understood is also critical. So thank you again, Jackie, for this, for highlighting these issues, these additional issues. We have come to are there any other questions or comments? And so at this point, if there are, I am so grateful to all of you for being part of this conversation. This is something that needs to happen. There is so much richness to this. I think we just need to have a blog about this, make sure that we continue to push these issues and raise them as people don't understand their complexity and their impact. It's really critical. Thank you so much. Emily,
not much for me to add other than a big gratitude and a deep bow to all of you. You are goddesses, and you all embody this topic with all of its messiness and nuances. And I have been on the receiving end, Pamela, of your just cultural and linguistic humility and sensitivity, building a bridge so I could walk into a circle of Maasai women and just hear their stories. It was just such one of these small world unitive moments. And just all of you embody that quality. And with the gender equality dimension, it's like we're all, in our unique little tribes, but then in these moments where you can build these bridges, you feel the solidarity as women, as human beings. So really just grateful to everyone for being here. And we just have to go the extra mile. That's what you all are doing. Really appreciate your example and wisdom. And Marie Rose, thank you. You embody this so much for all your work. So
thank you.
Can you say goodbye in all of your languages?
You.
Shall we say goodbye in all of our languages? Goodbye.
Au revoir.
Kwaheri. Kwaheri.
Yes.
Namuche.
Nawe.
Bye-bye.